feel like somebody has taken a can opener to my skull, opened it up, thrown in a hand grenade, scooped out the contents and tried to glue it back together and replace my brain. This is my review of A Brief History of the Seven Killings by Marlon James. Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot. I normally post videos with my wife. We talk about all things bookish in a somewhat silly and somewhat sensible way. Somewhat. If you're new here, hi. Why don't you consider subscribing? It's somewhere down there. If you're old here, hi. Welcome back. Nice to see you again. Please consider commenting whether you're new or old, and of course liking. For today's video I'm going to review A Brief History of the Seven Killings by Marlon James. Some brief numbers on this this book. It's got 688 pages and an average rating of 3.88 on Goodreads. This book is a historical fiction crime high literary novel, and this book comes with lots of trigger warnings. Huge amounts of drugs going on, huge amounts of sex, huge amounts of violence, and just all the things, gore, rape and stuff. It would be rated R if it was a movie, and that's if it was lucky. So not for the faint-hearted is essentially what I'm saying. So if you like nice books, maybe skip this one. I read this for the Caribathon Readathon. Marlon James is a Jamaican author. He's also gay, and this book won him the 2015 Booker Prize. It takes place in between the 1960s and the 1980s, mostly in Jamaica, but also quite a bit in America as well. And it tells a tale of political corruption, a drug gang, and an assassination attempt on Bob Marley. Now, stylistically, bits of this are done in quite a strong Jamaican dialect, and bits of this are done in a stream of conscious style. It has unconnected storylines too. Now, all of this sounds like it might be a little bit experimental and hard. I found this book fairly accessible, fairly easy to follow. I don't like books that are a bit too tossy, essentially. And this book does walk that line, but it is quite easy to follow what's going on in it. One of the quotes in the book that I quite like is, Jamaicans are always trying to trade their small ghetto for a much larger ghetto. Adds a quote about America, obviously. This is an example that you can see with the two characters of Dorcas Palmer and Kimmy Clark. You can see Kimmy Clark will do absolutely anything to get off the island while she's on it, while when Dorcas is off the island, she doesn't have a very good life, and in the end Dorcas ends up craving Jamaica and buys a whole bunch of Jamaican food and stuff. And this is a real thing that Marlon James is putting in, that you should be, but that knowing who you are should make you happy. We can also see this in the character of Weeper. Weeper is Weeper has internalized homophobia and is a gay man, and we see inside his head in some sex scenes, and it's kind of bizarre because the positive and the negative in those scenes is from Weeper's point of view is quite extreme, and it's surreal and really quite interesting. I really liked that Marlon James allows you to empathise with his characters, and that's despite most of them being murderous, unfeeling monsters. He lets you see inside their head. And he does it in a way similar. He uses this thing where he uses character faults to make you like the character in much a similar way that Gail Honeyman does in Eleanor Oliphant. And I really like this, where the characters' shortcomings make them more likable and more enjoyable. So if you've got any books out there that do this, please let me know. I would love to read more of these books. What did I love about this book? Well, basically, let me say absolutely everything. This is an incredible book. It has, firstly, a wonderful balance between the plot and the themes and ideas. Often you can get authors that will focus too much on the plot, and you're like, oh well, I was entertained, but I wasn't really stretched in my brain. And then other times you can get authors really concentrating on their themes and ideas, and you're like, well, you had some nice ideas, but it was boring. Marlon James is not boring. Marlon James is not going to trigger your brain. You've got a lot to think about in this. He talks about so much more than the brief hint that I have given you already. He really does get the balance right between his literary wank, for want of a better term, and the accessibility of this novel. For somebody who is utilizing stream of consciousness, he utilizes it brilliantly. He utilizes it at the right time. We've got stream of consciousness during things like gunfights and sex scenes and stuff, and it's done so well. It actually adds to your knowledge of the events, rather than being this bizarre literary thing where you can go off on a tangent and get confused. The strong Jamaican dialect can be quite challenging to listen to, but it adds to the story, it adds to the ambience of the novel, and it is easy to get into that. It's easy to get into that feel. It's written in this such a strong, such a strong dialect, such a strong accent. It really allows you to, it adds to the novel in the end. While it's challenging in the first little bit, it suddenly, you develop that skill, and it suddenly becomes easy. And this book really did take me to my limits, but it didn't cross any lines. It really pushed me as far as I was happy to go. And I would like to say right now, if you have read this book and liked this book, Nell asked me, she said, well, what other books would you recommend from this book? And I don't have an answer. There's nothing like this book out there, I'd like to say. But if you have a recommendation for what you think is like this book, please let me know. Now, the negatives of this book, look, firstly, it's R-rated content. It really is full on. If you are in them, if you've had a bad day, if your grandmother's died, or your husband's left you, or your pet's feeling sick or whatever, don't pick up this book. Just save it for a day when you can deal with this sort of stuff. But most of my negatives that I have listed down here are things that are actually positives, because he's done this novel so well. Most of the negatives I've got are actually positives, because he's done this novel so well, Marlon James, that he takes things that I don't normally like in books, and he makes me like them. He jumps around between his characters too quick for my liking, but I don't mind. He talks in a style that I have to concentrate to understand, but whatever. He can almost appear a little bit episodic, but it's all interconnected, and it all has lovely themes running through it, so it's not episodic. And he has a lot of characters in it, and I find when you get too many characters that's it. My head can only follow so many characters at once. And I certainly struggled with the with the sheer abundance of characters, but he's very good at pointing out that you need to know who Josie Wales is, you need to know who Nina Burgess is, and that the other characters, Tony Pavarotti, he sort of tells you who Tony Pavarotti is when you need to know who Tony Pavarotti is, for example. And he's very good with his dealing with the sheer volume of characters. It really is an author who understands the positives and the negatives of his writing style, and he's using the positives and he's accounting for the negatives and minimizing the negatives, which is absolutely wonderful. Overall, this book is one of my all-time favorite books now. It is one of the best books I've ever read. 5 stars is not enough stars. So I'd like to ask you for recommendations. I loved this book. So if you've read it, give me recommendations. If you haven't read this book, read it and let me know what you think. As always, please like, comment and subscribe. We post videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. I've been Scott from Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot. Bye!